他不讲啥是他的上录还是录不录是咱的事。行，放你边上，你看对准他了，给他怼进去。就放那个。
这。对准了。嗯。
朝下压一点，朝下压镜头可以朝下。直接对准。
这样，你们组那3个人后来怎么样了？
有一个印度的大神。
啊？什么？
有一个印度的大神。
进去了。
啊？
不是你们组不是3个人吗
？4个。
又变成4个了。
啊，对，就他又改了，把我们组给拉出去了。
我还是没有见到我们组的别人。
为啥你不给他发邮件吗？
他们也没发邮件，而且也没开始，到时候再说。
那个印度的大神跟我们说，我们下周就开始做吧，做2个月。说我已经找到去年的那个题目了。
万一今年和去年的题目不一样呢？
它好像是很模糊的，没有一个明确的题目，就叫你自己搞一下去年的。它那个样子。我感觉这一个是抱着大腿。
很好。
印度的。
我感觉我们组的那几个肯定都很那个。
他一出来的话，就给我们发邮件，一直在那里狂发邮件找队员，让我们见个面吧。
蛮好的。
那我不知道我们队员有没有熟悉前端的，做U叉的。
U叉是啥
？U叉就是前端，就界面的设计做得美一点。有个印度鸽子，我们所有人飞行就不怕了。
为什么？
真的，我感觉他能说啊，他说啊，听不懂，没有问题，听不懂就由他上嘛。还有好像是尼泊尔的。
还有一个呢？
还有一个最后一个还没见到人在哪？
还没见到人？
对。
我以为你们已经建好了。我国2为什么又改成3月18号播放？3月
学姐把那个上一届做的第一个
这是啥？这个是他们做的网站吗？
对啊，就可视化。
看起来好高级哦。这个界面做的好好看。
下的，这个前面是下的，前面是下的。这个是自己做的。
这是干嘛？开没了。而且今天发了他的那个视频过来，他都好懵啊。是的，因为放姐在跟别人讲话，然后突然把镜头转了他那，感觉他就一下就懵了。
看到转折了吗？
嗯，看到了。
哦，服了啊！
哭了呢。
我是在哭了。
多愁善感的 boy。
我们告诉说，哎，我真的都已经准备哭了，他转的太快，哭了，然后
有看这个吗？
来找你，放头。
哦，看了，我没看。
我这么厉害，我都没看过，放头那个是多大包的？I feel like I'm never going to get through it. I may never get through it. The green bottle is really good because otherwise you have to do more thinking on that one.
油条也是。
Okay guys, next review. Okay. So, effectively, these are the way that we actually superimpose these different results. What is called it as a parallel coordinate of these. So effectively, this brings us to the point that how do we choose a good visual representation of our data? So with the previous one, you could, for example, see some sort of a trend, whereas with this one, it's very confusing. Okay. So the purpose of infographic, as I said, is to understand the data and to be able to communicate that. So what you see here is a diagram which is, it is some sort of like a skewed Gaussian. And what you could see is the age against the proportion of the people that they have got. They might appear depression in America. I mean, this is just some random data. It doesn't really anything specific. So, by looking at this thing, you can already see that people around sort of the age range between 40 and 42 seem to be having the most vulnerable to this syndrome, the depression. So this is how you would actually represent your data through a graph. This is again something that you can you use linear sort of regression or linear representation in order to make some sort of relationship between your two axes here. The other way to represent it, obviously, is through what we call as a bar chart. So you can have the graph, you can have the line, and you can have the bar chart to sort of communicate this data set. In here we are talking about the iPhone versus Microsoft revenues for a certain time, and then you can see that there's about $30 billion. iPhone has actually beat Microsoft, which has been the case since 2007. So by just looking at this data and having these bar charts, you would be able to communicate and understand your data set. So here you've got a diagram of the Olympics 2004, and you can see that this has been not necessarily a scalable representation of, let's say, Germany has got 499, France has got 523, Britain has got 615, Russia has got 999, and 1975 for America, USA. I mean, this is just, there is no representation relationship, it's just the scale of it says, okay, USA is higher than, let's say, Germany, by a sort of like a factor of 4 almost. I don't know if you remember from my 2 weeks ago, I talked to you about, or I don't know, what was one of the first, it was about when you actually represent the data, using the data set is slightly different. But in any case, we use the same sort of principle of representing the data structure. So the data structure is being represented through how the relationship of different objects are associated with each other when you are trying to make a representation. So remember this one, when I showed you that if you want to sort of like draw a cycle, how you actually represent that. But the question is, in this particular case, if you are looking at the nodes and individual data, you can represent it like this. But things get far more complicated when you have got data sets, and these data sets have got some sort of a relation or dependency on each other. How many of you, I mean most of you, I'm hoping that you come across the relational databases. You? Yeah? Okay. So, effectively, in infographics, we are not looking at one individual data, but we are looking at the data set. And the main thing is that if you want to make a narrative, or if you want to come with some sort of a solution for your system, you should be able to look at as bigger data sets as possible. And then try to look at the commonalities between them. And try to detect the relationship or things which would segregate them from the rest. Okay? So this is a bit contradicting the idea of when you're actually doing a graphic, computer graphic or computer representation. Because in that particular case, each data set represents one particular thing. I mean, here, the wheels are represented by one sort of maybe a subroutine, which represent that particular wheel. And that's why it's standalone. Whereas here, we are looking at the relation between your data sets and what are the commonalities between that. So, for example, when you do things like object recognition, let's assume you are looking through the set of data for trying to find maybe somebody who's been stealing money and things like that. Or, you know, when you actually look at most of the companies, let's say in the bank, they say the conversation I mean, or if you ring up the police, or if you ring up, let's say, security services at the airport, they always record your voice. Why do they do that? Anyone?
To have an evidence of what you did.
Yes, absolutely. You have an evidence, but this is obviously, it is to support, you know, what you have been discussing. But there is also, there's another reason for it. For example, if you are on a benefit, or if you are ringing a bank, and then you say, well, I've lost my credit card, but actually, you've done something wrong with it. These conversations would be recorded, okay? But there are the tools which can detect these emotional feedback on your voice. And that can be actually detected through the simple conversation. So, it's not only the image, it's the whole process. I mean, imaging is one way of representing it, but as a fact, we're looking at what is called as a multimodal data pattern recognition. And so, if people who are lying, or people who are scared, or people who are telling the truth, they tone of their voice and intonation is very similar. So if somebody rings up and then, you know, they have sort of like engineered car accident, and through that they ring up and they claim for a false insurance on their car, when they talk, but just by pure speech, the system can recognizes this pattern. I mean, obviously with the graphics and visualization, it's much more easy to see. But what I'm saying is this is applicable to all sorts of data. So what we effectively are trying to do, we're trying to look at the commonality of this data. And where is it, which category does it fit? So, or if you like, when you want to buy a pair of shoes online, I mean, I give you all these various different examples because the principle of it is the same. Once you understand how the process works, then you can apply it for different applications. Talking about buying a pair of shoes, so effectively, if you are putting up your preferences for having a blue Jimmy Choo's boots cost about £600, and you manage to find a very nice place which sells it much cheaper, fallen from the back of a lorry. But what it does is it actually picks up the particular object and show it to, represent it to, and you would be able to see it. I mean, it was really interesting. I broke up my craft for my coffee machine 2 weeks ago. And it's an old one. It's a Dolendi one. So I can't find anywhere, you know, a coffee jar that you put in, coffee cup. So I went to Spares, and I tried to extract the number of the sort of the serial number of the machine. I looked at it, searched for it, and it came, voila, you know, the one I wanted. But my coffee machine is black, so when I opened it, it was grey. And I was really furious because it sort of like stands out like a sore thumb. And then when I tried to sort of like send it back, you know, they didn't have any black ones. But the problem was that the picture I had was black and white. So I mean, this thing wouldn't happen if, let's say, eSpares would also provide us a color picture. You see? So again, what I'm saying is that the data search that you do, the relational data search and the database that you do, obviously through the representation, you can relate that. You can not only relate that in order to retrieve the data, but you can actually relate that in order to explain the data. Okay? Is that clear? know it by now. Yeah? Information. Sorry? Without context. Very good. What else is data? Anyone? Come on, go back to the lecture I first gave you. We should be able to understand what data is. What sort of data do we have? Integral, continuous, discrete, anyone? Oh yeah, I know it's lunchtime and you're about to home and voice make you go to sleep. Don't make it too obvious, guys. So, our data set here, it consists of what? These are integral data sets. What does integral mean? No? Means there's no decimal. What's this? This is what we call the fixed point. What's this? That's what is called an alphanumeric. Where do we use alphanumeric? No, just come on, you are coming slide, this you should know. Yeah. Yeah. Alphanumeric. Where do you use the alphanumeric? Yes. Postcode, yes. When you actually program something, I mean, I was mostly thinking about, I mean, for example, most of you know Python? So you use, I mean, you've got different operands for the, if you are looking for the value or if you are just trying to put the value of the statement. Okay? So what is this? That's right. That is a fraction of a population. So then you have got what is called as a categorial, and then you've got a relational. So the data that you have got has got all these properties we discussed. But we are not looking at the data set. Okay? So the data set would have different properties. And depending on the properties that we have got, then we can do different things with them. In data visualization, the last three parts are the most significant one, are the ones that you use most. Has anybody got any idea why? Why would we be using mostly fraction of a population as a data representation? Why is it so significant? So if you look at this slide, you can see why is it that in data visualization, the percentage or the fraction of the data is mostly represented through data visualization. So in this cohort, I think we've got students from MSc Software Engineering, MSc Computer Science, MN Software Engineering, MN Computer Science, then we've got PhD students, then we've got Artificial Intelligence, and we've got Data Science students. But the way that you are representing in this cohort is different. Okay? So if I were to sort of like show the progress of different groups or different teams, I would be able to color that, and I say, well, maybe this particular group is doing really well, the other ones are not doing that well. And that would be the best way for me to represent it, if there would be a trend. Okay? So the data visualization would particularly use the element of the fraction of the data So what about the categorical representation data set? So in this particular one, what we have got is we have got the category of the data, which is represented through fruits. Okay? And the one at the bottom is a relational one. Because again, coming back and looking at the relation between the data. So it all boils down to the fact that if you understand these objectives of these various data sets, we would be able to understand the relationship among elements of these sets. So that is how we would be able to choose the best infographic for our data set. Okay. So here you have got a number of sort of random data. This thing by itself, it doesn't mean anything. Just have a look at it. So, now actually what I've done is I have plotted them against two different axes. So, it's at the bottom, what's the bottom, what's the top? Can anybody understand that or explain what you see here? The bottom axis is the frequency, how many times it happens. The top is the actual digit. So you got number 4.
That's not.
No, that's not.
That's index.
Anyway, that's what it meant. So at the top, I'm plotting these points. At the second one, I'm connecting them. This represents a charge, some sort of a function. Why are you laughing? Maybe share the joke, everybody laughs. Come on.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh. You told me I should.
Yeah, let everybody hear it. You shouldn't have a private jokes in the room. If you're on a laugh, you should share it with everybody else. So then you represent it with a bar chart. So what I'm here want to tell you is clearly by plotting these diagrams like this is actually completely different to what you were thinking at the beginning. I'm just trying to tell you that there is a way that if you represent the data, if the data might have the order might be a significant parameter. Okay? In some cases, your data set might have significance through the order by which you present it. So, here, we just draw these diagram, which it represents an order is insignificant. You just connect all the data points together. So if you look at this histogram, and this histogram, you can see that various different values have been plotted differently. So clearly here, we are not looking for a trend. And the order in here is insignificant. Okay? So when you are doing the visualization, you have to also establish, is the way that I'm ordering this visualization, is it a significant parameter or is it not? Is it just by itself trying to give a message, or is it part of a narrative that the order plays a part into that? So this is also, for example, if you are trying to determine the median of the diagram or something like that, you know, that is how you would try to represent it. Okay, if you have got a data set, this data set is probably multivariate. Have you guys come across a multivariate data set? It means that you have got very different relationship between the objects in the data set. So this is the parameter that determines how is your data set. Remember what I'm trying to establish here. I'm trying to establish what is the best way to choose your tools in order to represent your data. But before you're doing that, you have to understand what sort of data set you have got. So, how would you be able to establish that? You would be able to establish if your data set is a time series, is it a population or is it an observation? In the case of a time series, they are the same, but they change over time. Can you give me an example of that? What sort of data set would you have that is the same, but it changes over time? Temperature. The temperature in the room. No, because if your initial conditions change, then your time series will change. I mean, you can think about something, let's say, you know, the payment that you make for your rent is always the same unless your landlord takes it out. So it's the same, but it happens over time. Okay? So let's say that you are developing an app which wants to look at your maybe digital wallet or something like that. that is the thing that you know it occurs maybe every month, a Thursday of the month. Okay? So that is a time series. So it would occur over the period that you are determining. So, what about coming back to the example of e-wallets? Can you give me an example of the population? That is the observations of different things at a single point in time. I'll tell you what, it's me going to Vista or Westfield and I'll go by paycheck. That's really, really a very bad observation. I spend all my money on my credit card and it goes on one event, one day it's completely sufficient to make you complete bankrupt. And that is one population. You buy lots of different things, but it happens at one event. Okay? Well, coming back to the example of the Jon Snow, that was one population, that was one single event, which was different to the rest. Okay? So if you are working for a bank, you're trying to make a tool to predict somebody's financial behavior. So, I mean, if you want to go and get a mortgage, for example, you want to go and mortgage, the mortgage advisor, what do? They ask you to present your bank statement for the past 3 months. Okay? So your income is always a time series. It comes hopefully if you've got a permanent job or you get paid at the end, let's say end of the month, you get this money coming in. Then you've got your rent, and then you've got various different things. And suddenly, if you go out and spend maybe £5,000, you know, what is it, this gambling event, which really, you know, it might be a single event, but if it happens over time, that obviously changes the profile of who you are and how you are governing your financial status. So, and the last one is, if you have got if there are observation of different things at different points in time. So, if you're coming back to your bank statement, you've got maybe your phone bill, and you've got your, I don't know, your rent, and you have got your, TV license, which goes out. So these are the ones that they happen maybe on a time series basis, or they might happen on an individual basis. So these are all represented as observations. Okay? Now, this can have relationships among themselves, because one can be related to the other. Okay? So, if you have got, let's say, a car, and you pay for the sort of like payment of the car, and then you have got another outgoing which is about the petrol. I mean, they are happening at different observations, but they are related to each other. Because if you do not have a car, maybe you don't buy any food, you don't need to pay for the insurance, and you don't have the petrol. So these are the factors which are relating your different data sets as a multivariate. And the relationship between them, although the observations might be by themselves, but they are related in that sort of respect. Which is good because, effectively, it means that if you manage to detect one of these factors in your data set, you would be able to look at the cluster of all these relationships around it. diagram that you like so much. I've made it double again. So you would see that here we can represent this data with lines, with stack bars. It can be scattered, or it can be stacked areas. So why do we use that? Because if you are looking at the relation between two different data sets, we need to represent them in one scale. Okay, the previous one, which nobody knew what it was, including me, that was just one line. Didn't say anything. But here, you're looking at the relation between two different data sets. So here, you have got the same data set, and then I've created another one. And that is how you would represent these relation multivariates between two different data sets. So, but then the way we actually look at this is each of them are different. For example, if you're looking at relation among dimensions, that is what you use something like a scatter diagram. It's just a single line. It gives you the relation between two different dimensions. The one on the left, it gives relation among examples. Okay, so you have got two different sets. You plot them as the same one. Here, you plot them against each other. On the right-hand side, you plot them against each other. You look at some sort of linear relationship between the x and the y-axis. But the way that we represent them on the left side, you actually compare them. And you try to see how these relationships between these two examples exist. So, but the one at the bottom is actually giving you a relationship between the total of the two data sets. So you are looking at the total trend of the blue and the red. Or you compare them as individual elements on top of each other. Okay. So one other thing I want to talk about is the visual dimensions. So when you're actually making a representative of a big data set, let's say a population of a country or a spread of a disease or something like that. I mean, in 2 weeks' time, one of my colleagues, one of the colleagues from university is Dr. Michael Head. They work at the Department of Medical School. And actually, he looks at the spread of tropical diseases using open data. And one of the main parts or the tools that they use is literally looking at how these data trends moves across. So let's say somebody has got Ebola, and this person travels via, I don't know, maybe from Sierra Leone, goes and sees his cousin somewhere in South Africa. In South Africa, this chap has got relatives in New York. The New York people have got somewhere. So this is how you would be able to look at the big pattern of this spread of Ebola. I mean, that is how they would look at that. And actually, places like Gates Foundation, which I think Mike has also has got some projects about that, that's exactly what they do. So you look at the visualized dimension of these big data sets to be able to give you a general, sort of like more of a macroscopic trend of your data. So last year, I had some students that they, for example, looking at the pollution in a city like Shanghai. And what they were looking at was they were looking at the temporal changes of environmental development in Shanghai or some small town in China, I don't know, just outside Shanghai, by which you look at the data set and just looking at maybe this one element of CO2 and just looking at the trend of that and then be able to determine, you know, where it's going to be the most lucrative place that you want to buy yourself a house. So using these visualized dimensions, you would be able to actually translate the data set. So I went through these various different elements of the data set: integral, fixed point, or integer, fixed point, alphanumeric, fractional, population, categorical, and relational. So this represents, in terms of the visual dimension type, you would have a position, which this position translates into a relative location or centrally to describe objects within your data set. So the alphanumeric, it represents some sort of a shape, saturation and opacity for representing the data. The fractional population, it comes as size, weight, or height of the data that you have got. I'm going to show you some examples, then you can understand the relationship. But the other thing which is important is the orientation. You remember the first pictures I showed you? The way that the orientation is very important, especially if you have got things like object recognition. And orientation together with the texture, it is the way that it defines the relation between the data. Okay, let me come to these last three. So, I'll start from the top. What do I mean by the position, and how does it actually represent an integer part of the data set? You have got one point. It has got one array and deg, right ascension and declination. That is what it determines, a point in the universe that is a specific. It's unique. Okay? Or if you have got your coordinate system, that represents the relation to your coordinate system. So you would be able to represent that in that sort of way. The shape is really represents how the objects are perceived. The size and the weight, obviously, that is represents how big or how small these particular objects might be representing your data set. Things like orientation and texture, they're very important. If you have got, let's say, you want to try to find someone in a series of CCD images in London, the only way that machine can understand what you are looking for is to be able to specifically determine the object, where it is in these frames, and what sort of texture these objects, or I mean, if you're looking for a person, what sort of thing they wear. And if you have got, let's say, a texture by itself, positioned at certain distance locality, which is not to do with the object with the area of interest, that doesn't mean anything. So in the case of the texture and sort of position and orientation, these are actually multivariate in terms of the object representation. Does that make sense? Or are you all? or a piece of fabric. This piece of fabric, it just suddenly appears on the picture on this wall, which is all made of wood. Clearly, there's something wrong here, because all this wall is made of wood. So the texture and the orientation is very much depends on the rest of the data set. And if you are trying to do something like object retrieval, that is a crucial element to understand. Have you come across the expression juxtaposition? You know what it is? It means when you are in the wrong place where you shouldn't be. Anyway, I quite like watching Only Fools and Horses, and one episode of it was when Del and Rod, they assumed they wanted to go to a funeral, and they all dressed in Batman and Robin. So they appeared in Batman and Robin costume in a funeral. So obviously, if you are doing something like that, you're completely out of place. So if you have got certain objects within a data set which doesn't belong to you, that is something that is represented by juxtaposition. So you are having a wrong object represented at your data set. So this is how these various representation of a data is as a data dimension type comes to the data visualized type. So when you are trying to look at the categories and the way that you represent it, effectively, this is really going to be very helpful for you to be able to map what sort of data set I have got and how can I represent it. Any questions? Or is it too confusing for you? Come on guys, talk to me. Or is it too simple to understand? Is it just obvious? Pardon? Is it confusing? Okay. So, if it is confusing, I'm going to very quickly have a mind game with you. If you were to represent a data set, and this data set is about the population of people in Berkshire with obesity, you have got this data set. If you want to represent it, which one of these visual dimension types would you use at the first order?
Use circles, I'm sure it's fun.
Sorry?
I thought maybe circles, like shapes.
Yeah, okay. What else?
Wait,
Good.
so like, if you use a circle,
Yeah, you use that in terms of your map. What else do you use?
colors,
Sorry?
colors,
Colors, yes. What else do you use? You use the size, yeah.
Size for the
Size.
frequency.
What else?
you can use a pattern if you want.
No, I think actually these three would completely describe the scenario. Okay? So, it really depends what your data set is and what you're trying to say. If you were to look at the distribution of the Ebola in the last 12 months, which ones would you use in order to represent your data?
Texture.
Texture? Why would you use texture?
section. Yeah.
You surely would use the position, first the size, yeah, what else? Also the color. Color, yeah, what else? Do you use anything else? Or you use movement? Okay, because you are following the trace of this disease. And then it would also be interesting because if there is something odd happening, which doesn't follow your trend, then this is also a question that this data set maybe is just by mistake. All right, you get the gist of it then. I think I'm going to stop. I might finish this off next Monday, and then very briefly go through the D3